A lot of the discussion about server components has been low quality, and I don't think it's just the fault of the React team.
Today, we have Dan Abramov on the channel. Dan has been shaping React for almost a decade and is one of the biggest reasons why we all know React the way we do today. From React class components to introducing hooks. From creating Redux to his recent posts on React server components and suspense boundaries. Dan has been an incredibly influential voice in the React community.
Like, your framework should tolerate mediocre code. Most code is mediocre, but also some piece is really bad. You kind of need to be able to contain the badness, not necessarily tell people that they should write better code.
In this conversation, we dig into React's evolution, some of the biggest misconceptions around React server components,
That people think that React server components have something to do with server rendering.
and Dan's unfiltered thoughts on Next.js.
I wish I could skip a year and just like wait to like next 17 or whatever, where it's like the team works really well.
From app router bugs to performance challenges,
Just in terms of like stability, I think like it had a lot of bugs, especially with like advanced features like parallel routes and so on. Like, gradually got squashed, but it was a very long process.
and what he hopes will come next. And of course, we talk about community, the good, the bad, and why Dan stepped away from Twitter.
There were people who had conspiracy theories like about Vercel, like this is the one that I'm like kind of most tired of. Sometimes like people would like argue against the technology.
This interview is packed with insights, stories, and plenty of hot takes. So grab a cup of coffee and let's dive right in. Hello, Dan. Thank you so much for joining my channel and being part of this interview. I'm really excited to dig into a lot of really cool stuff about all the way from like React server components to where you are at right now, and a lot of blog posts that you've been writing that I'm personally really loving. So yeah, thank you so much for being part of my channel.
I think
For folks who don't know, which I feel like everyone knows you, but for folks who don't know, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Dan. I've been on the React team since maybe 2015. I'm sort of not really present now, so I don't know if it's still fair to say I'm on the team. I'm like sometimes joining the calls, but very rarely. But I'm kind of like on a sabbatical now. But I've been working at Facebook until 2021, maybe 2022. And then I worked for a couple of years at Blue Sky. And then this year, like from this year, for now, I'm not working at all. Um, yeah, kind of starting to do some consulting, but not super actively.
Awesome. So I guess that was going to be my next question. Like, what have you been up to lately? And like, what are you thinking? Like, where's your head at? And like, tell me more about the life of Dan.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm kind of I burned out a little bit. So I've been working on the Blue Sky app, like in a small team, and I've been doing both like engineering work and some management work. And I think it was a little bit much for me. And actually, like I've had a few things that I really wanted to kind of get done in that app, and I like by the time I stepped away, I felt like I've accomplished the things that I wanted to get done, and I really needed to take a break and just like I've had kind of nonstop work since I was in 18. So I actually wanted to take a little break and just see what else exists kind of outside of work. I've been picking up a little bit of mathematics on Proof Assistant, specifically Lean amateur level. It's just something that I got curious about. Maybe I'll blog about it in the future. And I've been writing quite a bit. So I kind of had a writing block for a couple of years where like I didn't really write at all. And after I left my job, I kind of broke through it, and now I'm writing fairly regularly. Like I've been writing like maybe an average of like article per week for the past month and a half. So that's on my blog called Overreacted. And yeah, I think that's kind of the primary thing I actually do now is writing. And I also started to pick up a little bit of consulting. So just advising people on like front end and stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been really loving all your blog posts. And you mentioned that you've been sort of not writing and then writing. I feel like how do you get creative and how do you get your creative juices flowing? Because I think that's something that I also face where I'm like, I just can't write. This month I just cannot do any creative work. But then once I do, I get in the groove of it. So yeah, would love to know more.
Yeah, I don't really understand how it works. I think I kind of like I had this, I had this article that I kind of actually started with like this year. Like I had this article that I was trying to write a year and a half ago, I think, and I just couldn't write it. I couldn't figure out like how to kind of even like approach it or like where to start. And I ended up doing a talk instead.
Mm-hmm.
And then I still had these like thoughts that didn't fit into the talk, but they also were not kind of, I couldn't frame them cohesively as a blog post either. And at some point when I was not doing anything, I was just, okay, I'm just gonna give up. Like, I'm just gonna kind of admit that I can't make something cohesive out of it. Like, it's just messy. So I'll just have like a bunch of notes that are kind of disconnected and not like really like a blog post. And that I'm almost like writing for myself because I like, not really trying to like write it for any specific audience. And then actually like that unblocked me and I ended up writing like as it's very overwritten. It's like a huge blog post, like bigger than like my even long reads. It actually I think it just helped to get it all out on paper and then I was able to kind of get more focused in the next ones. But I think at some point like you just kind of have to, let the thing write itself and just kind of let go of the expectation of what you're doing with it. And from that point, I think it's kind of still that process where like I have a bunch of drafts that I'm starting a draft and then I throw it away. One thing that actually helped, which I think like a lot of people are gonna be judgmental about it, but I actually feed my drafts to Claude now, and I kind of use it as a hype man. So I don't ask it to like write anything. I just I really dislike the kind of AI generated. It's not doing the thing that I wanted. Like I'm not like in principle opposed to it, but it's just not doing the thing that I want.
Mhm.
But I really find it valuable to like, hey, like I'm starting a new article. Here's like the first section. What do you think? And it just kind of hypes me up, and it's
Yeah.
enough for me to kind of keep going because I'm like, yeah, like it kind of sees the same thing that like I want people to see, and then I relax a little bit about the actual audience because
Mm-hmm.
like in practice, I think like the actual audience it's a mixed bag because yeah, like some people are just like they don't read, they kind of just scan and like
Mm-hmm.
or they want me to like optimize for them. Like I get like advice, oh, you should like put the conclusion of the article in the beginning. I'm like, yo, like I'm not a AI summarizer. Like if you want to
Yeah.
do it yourself. Like I'm
Yeah.
kind of writing a story.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, just I think like it helps to let go of like audience expectations and to get like a personal hype man in the form
Mhm.
of AI is yeah. I don't know. It worked for me.
No, honestly, actually, that's really cool because I've been also like working on my course as well. And at one point, I just hit a block where I'm like, I can't work anymore. So I went to ChatGPT. Actually, I'm going to switch to Claude too now that you're saying it. But I went to ChatGPT and I was like, yo, I'm blocked. I don't know what to do. Help me. And I was just like, capitalize, help me, exclamation. And then ChatGPT is like, I hear you. I see what you're going through. And I'm like, oh my God, I see, ChatGPT can see me. So that was really funny. But actually, that helped unblock me. And I was like, you know what? Actually, the thing that I was focused on and the thing I was struggling with was just overthinking it because I'm such a perfectionist, right? And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think you hold yourself to such a standard and you're like, even you can meet that standard and you don't know that you have that standard. So I think that really helps. So yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think like that, that was one of the problems for me. It's just, yeah, like it's like impossible to meet that standard.
Mm-hmm.
I've also, yeah, I've also kind of noticed that like sometimes it flows differently. Like I've had these issues where it would, I would rewrite the same sentence like 20 times. And I
Mm-hmm.
kind of know that like once I get into that space, I'm really not making progress. It's like something else is wrong. And sometimes I just have to think about what I'm trying to say. or kind of just like think through different examples or like do something else. And then like at some point I kind of just sit down to write and it's like boom, like I got like 5 paragraphs down. And then as soon
Yeah.
as I have like a solid start that I feel like, yeah, like I can kind of vibe with that, then I just build on it. And then if I get stuck, one thing sometimes I do is I just kind of backtrack. Sometimes when I'm stuck, it just means I went into the wrong direction and I just need to kind of accept it. Like, let's backtrack to like, it was still good here. Here I realized, oh, there's like this paragraph, like it has to be another article. It doesn't belong here. And I feel free to like, okay, like I'll just stash it. I'll just think about it later. Maybe I'll throw away this one and I'll just write this one instead. It's like realizing when actually, like I don't have one thing to say. I'm trying to say like 3 different things and it has to be 3 different posts. And then that kind of solves it.
For sure. I think one last thing I'll say before we move on to other topic is just like your blog posts, I can see that how you're thinking. Like I can read through it. Maybe because like I also write and work on like maybe create courses and stuff like that, but I can see how one thought has led to the other thought and you're explaining that in depth and then moving on and pulling us back that here's the big picture, but how does it happen and why does it happen? And that's why I really love your blog. So thank you so much for writing. I think it's really awesome. And I've been pushing it out in my newsletter as well because go to your blog now and check, does Dan have a new article? Because it's actually really helps me to think about those topics as well, right? So which is really cool.
Yeah, thanks. I think like I kind of, I guess like part of the influence here is also just the way like Sebastian would explain things on the React team, like he's kind of the, the big brain behind everything. And I just realized like, oh, I have so much context actually, like why things, designed a certain way, like how things developed historically, like even outside React, like what are the different kind of systems that were built. And I realized a lot of that context is actually like has not been carried through. Like people just don't know to like explain it. And the other inspiration, I guess, was just diving into mathematics. Like mathematics is very systematic, right? You could like to build an argument on top of like a previous argument. So like I kind of structure articles a bit more like proofs now, where like, okay, here's like first, lemma, here's like the second lemma, here's like, from these two
Yeah,
things
yeah.
follows this thing.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. I love that you're writing and I want you to keep writing. So I'm gonna keep pushing and publishing more of your posts. Not publishing, but like, boosting. Boosting is the word.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay, so switching gears to React, because one of the blog post topics was about server components. And one of the things I feel like I could see you write a lot in a lot of your threads, which I thought about it. I feel like there should be a Dan GPT where people can just ask questions. And that could be your topic for your next blog post. I don't know. But a lot of threads that you have, I think you explain your thought process, and that really helps a lot of us actually. So I guess what is probably the hardest part about getting the community to embrace React server components? Because I see that you have been writing a lot and you've been explaining the same topics, and I get it. And I feel like a lot of folks get it, but I feel like there's such a huge community that still don't. So, what has been sort of the hardest part of getting the community to embrace server components?
Yeah, I think kind of that's the thing is like there's multiple things. Like one is just the question like what does embrace even mean? Right? Like I think there's kind of a misconception. People think that I'm trying to like get everyone to use them. Whereas I think I'm more like I think with the post that I'm writing now, I kind of have 2 goals. I think one goal is just to kind of elevate the discussion so that we're actually discussing the same thing. I think one of my frustrations with the React community, and I'm not saying that I'm kind of like independent now, so I can bitch about things a little bit more.
Yeah, feel free.
But yeah, I just think like a lot of the discussion about server components has been low quality. And I don't think it's just the fault of the React team. Like I think there's actually been so much willful misinterpretation, maybe because of, like there were people who had conspiracy theories like about Vercel, like this is the one that I'm like kind of most tired of. And it's actually like one of the reasons, sometimes like people would like argue against the technology while completely misrepresenting what this technology is. And again, might have been a problem with like documentation, communication, and so on. But also in many cases, like the things that people are claiming are just like downright false and like very easily verifiably false. So the main thing that I wanted to focus on with my post is just to make sure we're discussing the same thing, right? Like we can argue whether this thing is good or not, or like whether it's worth adopting or not. And I'm actually like, I'm not saying that like everyone should adopt it. And I'll probably need to write about this as well. But I just want to make sure we're actually discussing what this thing is and not like some, fantasy about, or like a nightmare about what people think it is. And so that's kind of why I was writing these posts. So I think that is like a big challenge, is just to get to the same, get to the same understanding that we're actually discussing the real thing. And the other is just that it's kind of, I think it's just tricky to talk about because it kind of unifies many different threads. I find that the best way to explain it really depends on the audience. Like the way I would explain it to somebody who's familiar with Astro is completely different from the way I would explain it to somebody familiar with Remix, which is completely different from how I would explain it to somebody familiar with GraphQL, because it kind of takes like client side React exclusively and like React Query or something. So it kind of takes, like, you can think of it as like an evolution of, each of those approaches, where it solves a bunch of problems with it and like adds some novel twist. But this twist is kind of subtle, and like you need to really understand what the problems of those solutions are so that you can see, oh, I see, that's what they're doing. And so that's why I kind of realized, okay, I can't write like a single post. Well, I did write like a single post that kind of builds it up completely from scratch, like without even assuming like React exists. And that was kind of just for fun. But I'm also writing these, like each post is kind of like, there's this parable about blind people describing an elephant and describing like it from different sides. Here's like the leg, but because you kind of can't see the whole picture. Um, and I think it's kind of like how I'm feeling in the sense that I can't describe the whole thing because it's kind of, you don't feel the connection to it. Whereas I can describe it from different sides and then it resonates. And so I'm like, okay, I guess I need to write 20 posts for 20 audiences, and it'll like eventually I find that it clicks, like each post clicks with the subsection of people. Like people say, oh, this time it clicked for me, but it's always different people for different posts. So I'm just like, okay, I have like 20 more, like in my head that I think I need to write. And then at that point, I'm kind of, okay, my job here is done. Like I just feel like I need to shake it off. Like I need to finish it.
For sure, yeah. And I think like people who have been using React for a very long time, their opinions are going to be very different than people who are completely new to React and like learning React today. And they will be like, what are React server components? I thought that is how we just write code, compared to like how a lot of us other folks started, where it's like we know a React, we have been there from like class components to function components to hooks to all of that, right? So I think that's also like gets very tricky to
I think
have everyone resonate. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it gets even trickier than that. Like, I think what you described is kind of the usual problem, is like, okay, here's an existing audience, here's a new audience, and the way you teach them is slightly different. And then at some point, the new audience will kind of be the default, and you kind of want to accommodate them actually a bit more. But I think here it goes even further, because actually the kind of, I think to fully grasp it, you actually need to go before React. Like you need to not just like think back to React, but think back to like what preceded React, like how did we build websites and apps before it? What were the good parts of, server driven approaches like static generators and so on? And what have we lost by moving to React? Which a lot of people who kind of grew up right in React, they were not active in that phase, or they were not doing web development in that phase. And so they don't have the same kind of appreciation for what has been lost by moving to React. And I think that's kind of what makes like server components funny, is like everyone hates it because, server people are like, why are you putting React in here? And like client side people are like, why are you making me think about the server?
Yeah.
And there's just so much kind of miscommunication, because you really have to go back to the start to see, oh, actually that, it makes sense. Like it's like a cohesive thing that makes sense.
And you wrote a really good blog post that I'll definitely link below as well on this topic, where you talk about the evolution. And it was really nice, I guess, like a refresher as well, because a lot of us forget, right? Because like we are so in like the modern sort of world that we are like, oh, right, that's how it was. There was Ajax and there was, just pure HTML and like PHP days and like all of that stuff. So, yeah, your blog article was a really good refresher for me. So I'll definitely link it down for folks who need that refresher or who are completely new and like, oh, this was how it was back in the day as well. So what is something, I guess, like what's the biggest misconception that you find about React server components that you keep running into?
Yeah, actually, this is like this will be the maybe the topic for one of the next articles. I kind of don't want to screw it up, so like I don't want to
Okay.
commit to this is like I'll definitely write it, but I think the biggest one has really been that people think that React server components have something to do with server rendering, which I know it sounds like it does because there's the word server. Server rendering in the React community is usually understood as pre-rendering your client tree to HTML for like faster, first load and for better SEO. And so they think that React server components is somehow related to that, but it actually has nothing to do with that, like at all. So it's like two completely disconnected things. You can pre-render server components to HTML. That is something you can do because it produces a normal React tree, and you could always pre-render like a normal React tree to HTML. It's like a completely unrelated feature. Whereas the way I would describe React server components, I think, I kind of see it as really a componentization of the API layer. So when people say like, "Oh, I don't want to run a server," I'm like, "Well, like, where are you hidden? Like, where does I live? Like, is it on the server? Like, that is what like server components is about. Is essentially, well, what if your API could return React components, not just like JSON? What React server components is just a way to serialize React trees so that your server could respond with like, like a whole page of JSX essentially with like interactive bits, not just talking about HTML, but like a counter component with its props and whatever. It's just API that returns React trees. And the kind of the benefits of that are, it doesn't need to necessarily like replace your main API, right? Like there's kind of two ways to adopt it, I think. One way is where you kind of use it as a facade, like in front of your API, if adapts it for, like you do have the transformation from the data to the UI. And this just says some of this transformation can actually happen ahead of time before the response is returned. And that's, there's a lot of like reasons why it's useful. Like it lets, the client just do less. It makes the client simpler. It eliminates any like network waterfalls between the server and the client because you could just do everything on one pass on the server. Model is simpler. In some ways, it's similar to the problems that GraphQL solves, except you need like a separate language to do it. And so I think that is like part of it is just, this is a pattern called BFF. Like Backend is like a part of your front end actually makes sense for this part to live on the back end because it's just closer to the data source, better for pre-processing data before like sending it to the client. That is kind of the idea, but then of course, and you can still hit your like REST APIs from that BFF, right? Like it's in front. But you can also choose just not to have those REST APIs. You could have like an in-process data layer similar to how like in Rails or in Django, like you don't have to build a REST API. You can just like import or ORM and like build in a wrapper around the ORM that like has your like permissions logic and whatever. In some ways, this can actually get a lot more efficient than like, talking to REST APIs if you can directly use the database from in the data layer from your API kind of React API. I think that is like the big misconception is that people think it has something to do with rendering to HTML and like the annoyances around that, but it's really more about what if your API was made of React components, could return React components and stuff on that side.
And it helps with the network round trip as well, right? Because it's just next to each other versus like earlier we would go back and forth and that would just waste resources. So in a way, it's like helping the server.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, like I think, a lot of people like use React Query and there's like nothing wrong with that. But in terms of like the network characteristics, it's kind of similar to fetch and use effect for first loads or like for navigations where, you're not going to have the thing you want in the cache or like actually showing the stale thing is worse. Like if I click on your profile, it's, like it's best if it's preloaded just before I click so that like it's instant, but it would be bad to like show stale content and then have a jump with new content. So like caching doesn't really help for navigation forward. If you don't want the UI to jump around or like kind of have this like stale frames. And yeah, like what what does help is if you can like avoid in like with React Query or any similar solutions, you have this like network client waterfall problem where maybe you render parent component, it fetches some data comes back, and you're like, oh, like I'm gonna render these children, and the child has a use query, and you're like, oh, okay, I gotta do this, and you can try to like preload them, but ultimately like the ultimate solution is you just kind of move your queries to the server and kind of combine them in a single round trip. And that is essentially what happens with GraphQL with like if you use fragment collocation, or it's what happens with React Server components because, well, your queries are kind of on the server and you just get them all in the first pass and you get exactly the data your components need. So you kind of get, it just gives you the props that you want for the tree.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really good way to think about it as well, right? Like the few terms that sort of resonated with me was backend for front end and like saving network round trip, coexisting, co-locating your data versus having it go back and forth and so on. And just going back in the day and like comparing to where we are right now, I think that really helps a lot. Yeah, I definitely feel like we should write that article about the biggest misconception. That would be a really
Yeah.
good read. One thing I wanted to ask you was, React used to be known for its minimalism, right? Like it was this like library where it was like atoms and molecules and, components. I feel like back when I was working in a 9 to 5 job and like I was at a consultant firm, our arguments or like discussions used to be around what should be an atom and what should be a molecule and how can we reuse this into a design system and so on, mainly about React. But that has evolved now to suspense boundaries, server actions, caching APIs, and so on. So we have a lot today in React than we did like a few years ago, for example. So do you think that we are going too far off the simplicity of React? And do you think it will impact adoption in the future?
Well, I mean, I don't think so because I'm like, well, I don't know about adoption. I don't think it's a problem. The way I would kind of think about it is React is all about, there's this saying that like you need to make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. So there's like, okay, what is the no simpler, like where does the complexity go? Like some of the complexity is kind of inherent to what you're trying to do. Like for example, like you mentioned suspense boundaries. Like I actually think that's like a case where React removes a ton of complexity. But like, I don't think it's like adding complexity. I think this is a feature. This is an example of a feature that removes a lot of complexity from the user code because essentially like it's one line, two line. It's like opening tag, closing. When this part, anything here is not ready, show this like glimmer or spinner or like fallback UI, right? It's whereas like previously you would have these like if conditions, if is loading, each API had to return is loading. You always had to handle it like where you're fetching data, but the way you want to kind of like in the UI, you don't necessarily want it to be as granular as the data fetches themselves. So it was kind of causing this like, spinners everywhere, or like you couldn't start processing things until like everything has loaded. Like suspense is, I think it's, and it's also like there's a lot of complexity in the implementation, right? Because React is kind of like like an API needs to pay for itself. So in this case, like, yeah, like I think the balance is very, like, I think this is an example of like very good balance because from the user perspective, you just think like a designer who doesn't code can use suspense. Like that's wild, right? They can, oh, like this, this part of it, I don't like that this thing is loading like too slowly. I'm just gonna around it so that once I add this glimmer, like now it will appear immediately like things are loading. Or they can decide, these things are kind of jumpy. Like I'm actually going to remove these glimmers here and I'm going to add it like to the parent so that this entire thing just pops in at once. So that's like very expressive, very in the application code. Whereas like it is complex for React, right? Because React actually kind of, it piles a lot, like it kind of stacks a lot of things on. It's like it's like a boundary for revealing during the HTML stream. So it actually like emits chunks of HTML that get slotted in like during SSR. It also used, it works with client only rendering, so like it doesn't actually depend on SSR at all. It also works with code splitting. So like if some code is still loading, whether like from the server, like during with HTML, maybe it's not hydrated even yet, or so on. Like now it's getting it's integrated with CSS, with fonts, and with images. So some of
Yeah.
this is still experimental, and with view transitions, like the animations. So all of that, all of these things that have a lot of complexity inside React to make it work, they make React itself just like, just like a Lego block. Yeah, like you put these things into suspense, it does what you expect it to do, like in all cases. I think that that is the kind of abstractions that like React adds, is just like abstractions that elevate the shared primitive so that it can stay declarative while the complexity is pushed into React. And I think it's a good trade-off.
Yeah. And I feel like I've been enjoying writing React code more so now, I guess, because I don't have to now, if I architect my application well, and if I don't have a lot of interactivity in my app, for example, like you said, I can add a suspense boundary when I know I'm waiting for data, for example. But I also feel like I don't have to add fetch requests, store another state for is loading, and like render the loading component. I feel like we all had that same piece of, I guess, boilerplate code every time we were making like a
Yeah.
API request, and we don't have that anymore. And if you, I guess, understand what server actions do as well, I think it's like a lot easier to just create a function, right? And like
Mhm.
that exposes the HTTP endpoint that obviously you need to protect, make sure you protect. Because I keep telling people it's not just a function, but you do that and it just connects really well. And like, I would say like it's easier and faster even with like AI these days, right? Versus like you have to, I don't know, I just felt like there's so much code that I was writing that I don't have to anymore because of how the mental model has shifted. And it's like a lot easier now, to me at least. So yeah, I think, but there's obviously I also get it because there's so many new concepts now, right? Earlier it was just mainly about learning about JSX and like atoms, molecules, architecting your components and like states and hooks and so on, maybe. Hooks came a bit later, but depending on when we're talking about. But now,
Mhm.
obviously, there's a lot more new concepts. But I also feel like you get so much power, right? So that you have to. There's a little bit of learning curve now, more
Well,
so. Yeah.
I think it does remove some, at least like it kind of pushes some concept down a little bit,
Hmm.
right? Like if you use server functions, you probably don't need to like write API routes anymore, at least like
Yes.
not unless you have to.
Hmm.
And again, I think like a lot of this has to do with, like you mentioned AI, I think like the more you can do kind of locally, the more powerful it is. So like, even if you think of like something like a like button, right? Like you have like a mock-up of the like button. Now you want it to actually do something. Like traditionally this would kind of involve, okay, like I have to make this like fetch post request and then I have to go to the server, find my routes file or like express whatever, and then I have
Hmm.
to add a new endpoint there. And these things are kind of implicitly connected, so they're like not directly connected through an import. You kind of have to remember this thing has to exist here. Here are like its types. I need to like keep them kind of in sync. And
Yes.
like
Yeah.
I can't even like comment click through them. It's like I can't find all references. It's just this like convention and server components or like server actions. It kind of turns that into syntax. It's like, well, you wanna hit that endpoint, just like import it and add this annotation that it's an endpoint, and it will just work. And
Hmm.
again, what this empowers is like local reasoning. So now the like button component on the client, I can be like, okay, I'm gonna create like actions.js and I'm gonna just put my like handling code that is like server code. I'm gonna add like use server, and now I can import from that. And nobody else in my code base actually needs to know that I've done it. Like I don't need to coordinate with like a top level express route. I don't need to go in another part of the code base. So this makes all changes very local, and this enables like composition of this like local abstraction where, especially for AI, right? Like there's like context window of like things that kind of fit there. And even though
Hmm.
like it's getting better at like cross project refactoring, there's still a lot of power in like I can just create a file, import it, and here's my client code with its related server code and it's encapsulated.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing you said about the types thing is so real. Like you don't have to now create separate types and like have it all be synced, I guess. Like just like have one type and like share that. And like you don't have to communicate because I feel to a lot of different teams, like have a separate backend team or like front end team. I feel like everything is moving more towards full stack, right? If you are a full stack developer, the fact that now you can write server actions, and I feel like the thing about front end development, right? It has also changed and evolved as well, I feel, because of that too, which is actually really cool because it empowers more developers. Again, to your point about AI as well, right? Because you can just write a full stack application all in React. which is so freaking cool, which we couldn't do that earlier, which gives you a lot of power, and enable to create things, which is really awesome.
Yeah, and I think like that's like another reason why I think there's been such a big disconnect between like the front end community and say even like engineers at Facebook, or even though like Facebook doesn't use React server components, it's actually kind of blocked on like having all custom infra that's like, like a different bundler, like a different like
Really?
JavaScript engine like on the server. The server isn't hack. So and they have like a hyper optimized setup that's like very hard to improve on. So that's part of like why Sebastian moved to Vercel, is just like to actually like complete this vision that like Meta couldn't really take advantage of at the moment. Maybe they will eventually get around to it. But yeah, it's kind of full stack React, but I think kind of just from the organizational perspective, I think it's a lot less clearer what the benefit is if you're thinking in terms of like here's the front end team and here's the back end team, because the whole point of, I think, like you can still use React this way, like it works, but you really get like the benefit that it really unlocks, and like React's kind of approach to full stack really unlocks, is that you can instead structure your organization by the product features. So you can say, here's the photos
Yep.
team, here's the events team, here's this like customer support dialogue team or whatever. And each team can have, like a backend and a front end engineer, or maybe it's the same person now, or maybe it's like somebody and like an AI, but it's just because it's like each piece is kind of fractally composable and can contain both sides, you really don't have this barrier where you just like throw things over the wall. Instead, you just import your own code, but it could run on like a specific side.
Yeah, for sure. And hiring hopefully gets a lot easier as well, because one of the things I struggle with, I was leading a team and I feel like the back end and front end was so heavily separated that it was really hard for either teams to empathize on the other,
Yeah,
or like what
yeah,
goes on in the background, right? And it's like one sprint, I literally had them reverse their job. So like backend does
okay.
front end does backend as a fun thing. And suddenly people are like, I get it now. The CSS thing that you talk about, I'm just like, just do it. Like, why is it so hard? And now suddenly it's a lot more work. Versus like the backend, front end developers doing the backend work, they're like, optimization is so important. We get it now. Like where should data live is also a
Yeah,
discussion we had after that, which is like so cool, right? Because you empathize a lot more once you reverse the roles. And I think with the evolution of React, I think that's a lot simpler. Hopefully now with the conversation being, the empathy is now there because both of them are hopefully doing both those things.
yeah, you kind of swim in the same pool now. Like I think it's still like there is still some separation there in terms, like I think it kind of like front end gets a little piece of the back end. It kind of like just like moves over a little bit to be more like even sided, but there's still like the back of the back end, right? Like where
Right.
like maybe that's now like some of that engineering moves into like the data layer. Like maybe they work on the data layer library that has like caching, batching, whatever. But then the front end is just like calling into that. And that is kind of how it worked at Facebook, is like, like there was no distinction of like front end and back end engineer. They were just UI engineers,
Yeah.
and each UI engineer is like responsible for the feature kind of end to end. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but that's because they had these like powerful APIs on the back end that you could just use as a product developer. You don't have to like think about like, is this like hyper optimized? You just use the framework, and then the framework developers make it optimized. I guess, yeah, it's the thing you said about like kind of swapping the roles is kind of funny. Like I had the same, we didn't try that. That might have been fun, but I kind of had a similar problem like when I joined Blue Sky. Like one of the, and I know like both like the front end engineers and like the back end team are like very experienced like on both sides. So like it wasn't the case of them like not knowing what they're doing. Like they were very experienced engineers, but there was like a communication gap. And one of the first things I kind of tried to do there is to actually get those people to talk to each other more. So we started these like weekly like client plus server meetings where we would just say like, hey, like this endpoint, like it just sucks. Like we have to hit it in like a waterfall. Like it doesn't give us all the data we need. So we have to like do like 10 requests to like fully construct the UI or whatever. And so we gradually refined the server APIs quite a bit to match the front end needs. which wouldn't have happened if, if we weren't kind of collecting these things and just saying, like actually like this API is hard to use from the client. And that is like part of,
Mm,
my frustration with like, because we didn't have a BFF. So for us, it was just like React query on the client. And like, I wish we had, and I know the team is kind of slowly moving towards being able to do that. It's just, it takes some time to kind of spin it up and figure out like how to deploy and so on. So maybe like
mm,
in a couple of years or like in a year. But it was just very noticeable that if we had a BFF, we wouldn't need those conversations at all because we'd just be able to put that code on the server where it's fine to hit, 5 APIs and construct whatever we want to construct because the latency is low. It was really
mm,
only a problem because, well, it was kind of not under our control.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it has definitely unlocked, I guess, a new world that I think in the next couple of years we'll see more of, like, what more it unlocks and so on. So I guess, like, when it comes to starting off new React projects, would you recommend a framework or would you recommend going with something like Vite or something like that? I end up just going with Next.js because I just feel like I'm so used to it and I get that frame. I like the bells and whistles that it provides, for example. But like I have a SaaS now and like we show like bubbles at the bottom of your screen to sort of automate your social proof and like show who are actually purchasing and what they are doing, the website visitors on your site. I did a poor job at explaining it. But what I'm trying to say is that bubble itself, I just felt like it did not need to be using Next.js. Like for what? Right? Like, we just ended up going with Vite. And it was so lightweight and easy. And it is like whenever we have to change anything in that bubble, we just go to the Vite server and like make a few changes and that's it. It's done. It's like so fast, right? Versus on the other app, like where we have a dashboard and stuff like that, we're using Next.js. But I always wonder, like, what do you think about it? Like, how do you select a framework or not? Or do you, like, what are your preferences, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like actively starting a lot of projects, so
Mm,
it's kind of like a bias. I think ki- like my viewpoint is just based on like what I know the frameworks like do well or like don't do very well.
mhm,
But yeah, I think it depends on like, does the shape of the thing kind of, what like are the requirements unusual? Like is it like simple? Like
mhm.
for, like at Blue Sky, like we used Expo for React Native. Like it would have been like a total disaster to use React Native directly just because of like
Oh,
how
yeah.
much Expo like smoothes over the rough
Mhm,
edges. But then, we were using Expo before Expo Router, so we were using like React Navigation, and it did become a pain. Like,
mhm,
it partially because it just predated Expo
mhm,
Router, but like I wouldn't want to be stuck on a project where like I'm maintaining the bundling infra or like I'm maintaining like the router integration. Like I think like the abstraction just went up and
mhm,
it's just a question of like, does it satisfy your needs? Like if it does, I think like I would definitely pick a framework over, this like thing where it's like, oh, this like bundler is connected to this router, is connected to this data fetching thing. And it's like
mhm,
they're not working cohesively, or like
mhm,
maybe you're not noticing that they're not working cohesively because you don't think about problems like server client waterfalls or like how the code is being loaded or code splitting and so on,
mhm.
which is just like there are solved problems in
Yeah.
frameworks. And so, but I think like it's also, we're kind of in a weird spot where like Next.js app router is just like, it's not as solid as just in terms of like stability. I think like it had a lot of bugs, especially
Mhm,
like with like advanced features like parallel routes and so on. Like it had a lot of bugs that gradually got squashed, but it was a very long process. So like it was
mhm,
like a year and a half at least. And I think a lot of people were kind of like, like I'm using these features and it's just like downright broken in some cases.
mhm,
So I think that created the sour taste. Performance is still not quite there in terms of like developer performance.
mhm,
Like they're working on TurboPack, but it's still like not used for production builds and like it doesn't support all the features yet. So it's kind
mhm,
of like it feels like it's a bit in a limbo where, if they had just finished the bundling story, so that it's, like it just kind of feels like state of the art. I think that, and just feels like fast and reliable. I think that would help quite a bit. It's getting
mhm.
better again. Like I do see that it's getting better.
Yeah.
but that also feels one of those like I wish I could skip a year and just like just like upgrade to like next 17 or whatever, where it's like the default and works really well. And then I think the cache-in story is also it's pretty complicated in the current version. They've kind of revised it a few times because they were trying to balance like how to make it fast by default and like as kind of cache as many things as possible. But that really hurt like iteration and also just was confusing, like the heuristics were confusing. And I think the new model they figured out with use cache as a directive and this kind of cache world is very powerful. Like I actually think it's like one of those like potential holy grail moments of like, oh, you can actually like cache those things across requests. There's like protection against like leakage. It's very like it's very kind of clever, but like in a good way. But again, like, okay, when is it? It's probably gonna ship in some form like in the next few months. But like, when will it get? Like, when will the whole thing get really cohesive and stable? And I think realistically, it's just like Sebastian kind of reinvent. Like, he wanted to just like you know, solve it in a way that wouldn't fall apart if you scaled it up to something like Facebook. Like that was kind of like one of the intentions is that it should scale down to like a simple blog and it should scale up to like fucking Facebook. So, and that requires like, you have to kind of, okay, how does the routing work in a kind of infinitely scalable way? How does like data fetching work in like an infinitely scalable way? How do you deal with like this part is slow? How do you kind of contain the slowness instead of making everything slow. So, and he kind of ended up like with, a different bundling strategy, a different data loading strategy, a different routing strategy. Like he kind of like wanted to reinvent the world. And then the truth is like, it takes a bunch of, it just takes a few years to do that. And also it takes some mistakes. And I think some mistakes have been made in the first versions. And I think now like the designs they're kind of following up with, like they fix those mistakes. But I'm just saying it's still bumpy. Like it's not, it's not as polished into like, oh, this feels really great to use. I think the fundamentals are very solid and very powerful. And like I hope, within like a year and a half, I would feel like, okay, I don't have a hesitation about bumping into some rough edge that is like that doesn't exist in like more polished products. But I think that that's kind of the main pain point with Next.js right now is it's still a bit rough. It's kind of getting there, but not quite there.
For sure, yeah. And I think that my biggest frustration has been around navigation. Like I built my custom like course platform with Next.js, and I feel like every single time I switch between routes, I see like a second long loading spinner. Like, it's like a nice skeleton, but still like I don't want to keep seeing that every single time. Navigation has been definitely very tricky. I mean, it's easier to implement because it uses the file-based routing system, but like it's still a bit slow. Fine, especially as your app gets bigger. Like I have like 100 plus lessons, right? So it's like harder. But I found this very interesting pattern that folks are actually adding React router in a Next.js application. I'm not sure if you've seen that or not, but Theo did that, and I was just like, this is crazy. How do you do that? I actually have a video coming up on this because I was like, how do you even do that? Can it actually be fast? And it is actually like if you get rid of the router, it is fast. But then it's like at that point, do you want to be on Next.js? Then I don't know. That's a question, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I think like I mean I can't guess what the exact problem was. Like in principle the like I think they're still kind of tuning like how prefetching works exactly, but the usual solution is just to use prefetching because what the React router approach is you are essentially prefetching all the routes. Like you're just kind of it's called bundling, right? Like they are in your bundle, but essentially you have the initial shell of every route in your bundle, and that's why it's fast, which is equivalent to like prefetching kind of every link on the page. So Next.js should do prefetching already, but I don't remember what the heuristics are. Like there could be something about dynamic segments not being prefetched by default to kind of reduce the server load. And there's also like I think if your content is static, I think it does get prefetched, but maybe there's also like differences between the versions. I don't remember exactly. I also know they're like changing the the way the cache actually works on the client so that it can reuse kind of per segment caching. so that like fewer things need to be fetched if they're gonna get fetched. So this is something like I expect them to tune, but like in general, I don't think that it's expected that like it has to be slow. Like actually, I think like it's usually solved with prefetching. I do think that they're kind of lacking the like Next.js doesn't have a concept of client only routes where they're kind of bundled by default and like always, they're just like always there. And this is something that it could add. Like it's actually like one of the features that was in one of the early drafts of after like at this stage of like RFC, but it's also work. So like will be a feature in the future, which would be kind of equivalent to what you're describing. Till that exists, like yeah, like you can put, I know people will think it's kind of clowny, but like you can definitely put React Router in there. It's maybe a bit weird, but it's just I think it's kind of like a missing feature that like Next will eventually add. So I think it's just worth digging into like what is the actual cause of the slowness, because it'd be something that like prefetching is not working correctly for some reason. If there's like a small reproduction case, like it's just worth looking at like why.
Yeah, for sure. I think like you're right. I think it doesn't cache the dynamic segments because of the server load, right? For putting too much like load on the server. But for putting React Router inside the Next.js app, it was mainly about if you have like a heavy client rendered app, then it's, I guess, like Next.js is not that optimized for that. So like having a React Router in it means that your app loads faster and your routes load faster. Because like you said, right, it's like preloading all the routes. So it's obviously navigation is a lot faster. That was
Well,
like,
I think it's still a bit of a misconception. I would
Mhm.
need to kind of look into what exactly is happening. If you're not doing any server fetches in your like Next.js pages because you consciously decided to kind of move that to be lazy, do that on the client and kind of eat the, because like what you're doing is like, well, it's gonna show the route like faster, but there's not going to be anything on it because you haven't fetched the
Right.
content unless you also bundle the content. But if you also bundle the content, that means it must have been static. So it
Yeah.
could have been prefetched. So I
Yep.
don't know like what the problem is exactly.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
this React Router style, it just kind of lets you switch the page faster, but then you don't see the content if it's, if it's not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, if, in Next.js, like if you kind of also load it lazily from the client, then they should get prefetched. It's just going to be like empty segments because they don't. So that should also be fast. So I think
Right.
it's like worth creating like a minimal repro case and kind of asking the next team like what's the problem. It's hard to discuss like
No, for sure. I think that you make a very good point. Something that I can look into because I think that would be very interesting. And I think one thing you mentioned was like, yeah, like if many people want this type of a solution, right, where they're putting React Router inside of Next.js, then in that case, it is a good solution for the framework to add, right? So people can
yeah,
opt
there's
out
definitely
of,
something, there's definitely
yes,
some need that's like there. And I think Next.js could address this like client only kind of approach a bit better. Like I think they're very
Mhm.
cautious about not making something the default that's just like worse for the user. And so
Right.
they're like kind of cautious about making like they don't want to make it too easy.
Hmm.
But there's probably some characteristics of this approach that could be useful to bring into the framework.
For sure. Yeah. I guess like switching gears a little bit, you've been very open about burnout and your relationship with, I guess, open source, but also just in general, as the React team has really, React community has really evolved over the years. And I just wanted to ask you, what is sort of your advice to folks that are currently facing burnout or folks, because I personally experienced burnout too. And it's not a fun feeling, but I would love to hear if you have some any advice or if you want to share your experience, anything would help the community.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything that's like I don't have it like any advice. I think it's just, sometimes you kind of realize that you're like it just doesn't like I think if you're feeling like stressed every day, like that is that is a good signal that something's off. I think like with the community, I just feel like, that like I'm gonna sound like a cranky person, but I just feel like the kind of the atmosphere has changed quite a bit. I think maybe partially because of the just like change in the tech industry where there's been like layoffs and it's harder to like there's again this feeling of like you have to keep catching up with things, and also like maybe you're gonna get replaced by AI and so on. So I think there's kind of less joy in like this, discussing technology from the kind of technology perspective. There's a lot of frustration, like perceived or real complexity and so on. But I feel like the atmosphere has changed quite a bit in the direction of kind of entertainment, where I think at least like on Twitter, I feel like while I was like, I'm no longer on Twitter, but when I was there a couple of years ago, maybe it just felt like most of the kind of viral technological content, even like around React, was either kind of almost like blog spam, where it's like not very high quality, not very thoughtful, or just inflammatory content, really. And it's there are, I think it kind of get the like YouTubeized. It like there was a lot of this. It feels like a lot of kind of drama, or like it became a lot more personality driven, and the personality that kind of wins these things is like kind of more abrasive, or more kind of just like being a jerk, or like not very thoughtful, but like kind of good sound bites, or like. And again, like I think like I also did some of that, so it's I'm not saying that like I'm immune to it, but I think that was just a bit much for me. I just felt like this is not fun anymore, and want to argue with kind of bad faith takes that are intentionally phrased in a way that's like you can't give it like a thoughtful comment what they're aiming for. It's more like entertainment.
Yeah.
And so I kind of stepped away from that, and also just I just got tired of like arguing with people with like conspiracy theories about Brazil or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is not like, if I feel like I'm kind of getting mad at people online, this is just not a good way to spend my time. Kind of why I like retreated a little bit of like, okay, here's my little corner. I can write about like what I find interesting. I'm gonna like post it like on Reddit. Like Reddit has actually been and Hacker News, surprisingly, actually have been
Yeah.
super positive for me like lately, because somehow they actually feel way less toxic than like say Twitter or even like YouTube, where
Wow.
like YouTube is like almost like, you know, there there was this like somebody, like I wrote an article and then somebody made a video with like this like, over dramatic thumbnail with like somebody in blood and like React, and like there's like an arrow saying it's dying or whatever. I'm
My
like
God.
fuck this shit. Like it's just so like, just why does this need to exist? Like I just think it's I don't want to kind of interact with that.
Yeah. I feel like I hate it as well. I feel like the YouTube thumbnails, like you have to show. I find that my CTR doubled when I had like a shocking face on it. And even when you're at home, right? And you're like taking that photo, it is just so freaking hilarious. Like, I'm like, this is what I have to do. And I literally have like 20 photos of me being shocked because I wasn't shocked enough. So it's actually completely ridiculous. I totally hear you. But yeah, I'm really happy that hopefully you found your corner on Blue Sky. I really enjoy your content there. And like, I love you start posting in threads, and I love just going down just the trail of everything that you've been talking about. And I think really helps me think about how to think about a lot of those things and the sort of the why for all of that. But yeah, X has been really weird, and I've been not hanging out there as much. And I've been trying to figure out where's my happy little corner as well. So I think really things have changed a lot on social media.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So let's, switch things up and make it a little bit fun. I have you know, I call this a rapid fire segment. I had a section in the Notion that don't look. I'm not sure if you took a look or not, but if someone
No,
says
well, it
don't look,
said don't look. No, I
okay.
did.
If someone says don't look, I'm gonna look. No, I'm kidding. I won't do that. But yeah, I have prepared a few questions. Some are fun and some are just to get you, think on the spot. So, first one is very easy. Cats or dogs?
Cats for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really dislike dogs. Sorry.
Oh my God, my dog. I hope my dog didn't hear that. He just walked past, gave me a side eye right there. So, what's a React pattern that you secretly love?
Hmm. Well, I don't know, they're all so hacky. Like, there's this thing that I think I still don't know, like, what's the kind of the official way to do this. Like, I think someday there will be like an official way to do this. But sometimes you need to kind of focus something or like scroll something into view. Like maybe like you're rendering a new component, like you've added a to do, you want this thing to like show up or to get focused. Um, and the trick is like how to coordinate it because it may be asynchronous, so you can't really like do it with the ref directly. And one thing you can kind of do is to keep a almost like a queued thing, like the lot, like you can do like queue focus or whatever, and just like pass an object there, right? Like you can be like queue focus this to the item, and it just keeps like you have a top level variable that just keeps like last focused item, and then in the to do item component, you can have an effect that's like, oh, am I the last focused item? Okay, I'm gonna focus myself and clear that field. And it's kind of hacky, but like it's like one way to do this work, like to make this work that like doesn't suck too much, and I use it sometimes.
That's awesome. I think you should write a blog post on this. It's actually very helpful. It definitely sounds very helpful. What's one hot take that you will defend at all costs?
Well, I think like your framework should tolerate mediocre code and kind of, have affordances for like if some, if like some component is slow or whatever, can't always fix it. Like you need to have composable solutions that kind of contain most code is mediocre, but also some pieces really bad. You kind of need to be able to contain the badness, and not necessarily tell people that they should write better code. I think your framework should kind of let you contain the badness. So if there's like a part of the product or like UI that's like slow or like inefficient in some way, sometimes like you just can't fix it. Like the person responsible like is just not gonna do it, and you just need to have those tools that let you kind of just make it affect just this part and not kind of infect the rest. And I think a lot of like React's philosophy is like, yeah, some code will be bad, and the framework needs to kind of, like make sure that it's contained, rather than like just saying, oh, just write faster code, or I'm just gonna make DOM diffing really fast. Like help if like somebody is like blocking the thread or whatever. You need to be more flexible.
For sure. And so, what's one moment in your career you wish you could relive?
I think it was just really fun to like do the initial, like, when I got hired with Facebook, it was just kind of makeshift interview at a conference hotel just because they had enough people to actually run the interview. And I mean, I did not prepare for it because I didn't know that we'd be doing this. Like I talked to Jin Chan and she was like, oh, we're actually like hiring. But I think that was a really fun conference.
Awesome. And one last question. What's your favorite music?
Well, I don't know if I have kind of different things that I like. I think the one album I kind of keep coming back to is In Rainbows by Radio. One of the kind of most beautiful, like, I don't know, it's like very layered and it doesn't seem to get old. Like, I've been listening to it again like last couple of months and still sounds really good.
Awesome. I'll definitely check it out. Did you happen to post about it on Blue Sky? Because I feel like I may
Maybe?
have
Yeah,
listened
maybe.
to it and I really liked it. But yeah, I think that's all for all the questions I had today. I just want to thank you again for all the contributions to the community and also coming on my channel. I think this was a really insightful and lovely chat and I learned a lot from you. Again, it helps me know more about like how you think and I guess like sort of the why. And I think it's sort of like, lots to think about after the call as well. So thank you so much. I hope you had fun as well.
Yeah, thank you. That like the questions were really good and I appreciate your comments as well about like it's good for me to also get the perspective of like, yeah, like these are real problems that people are dealing with.
Yeah, and I will try my best to do a funny thumbnail for this. I'm kidding. I'll be like,
I don't mind the thumbnail game if the content is good. Like one is not, like for example, like I think like I watched like Theo's videos and like he's kind of doing the thumbnail thing, but he's also thoughtful. Like I like his content. Like I think he's generally like I think it's like both the way he structures his kind of essays and yeah, there's just a lot of good information there. Whereas what I'm like against is just stupid videos. Like if you
yeah,
don't have something meaningful to say, you're just kind of it just feels like it's ChatGPT generated, or you're just making things up, or you're not really like doing insightful analysis. Then that just feels like, well, why does that need to exist?
hmm
Does
yeah,
it really?
yeah. That's a very good point. I hate clickbaity content. Like
Yeah,
it'll be
yeah, that's
like a very like scary thumbnail. Like what does happen? And
yeah.
then
It's just trying to like work in your emotions, and I think that
yeah,
that is where I'm like, well, why are you making me feel this? I don't.
Yeah, yeah.
This made my
Especially
day worse.
yeah, that's true. It's like, yeah. But yeah, really looking forward to you writing a lot more blog posts and like, boosting it wherever I can. But where can people find you? I know you're not hanging out at X, but where can people find you? I'll also mention the links that you mentioned in the description below as well, so people can just click. But yeah.
Yeah, I think like, well, my blog is at overreacted.io. That's still there. I'm on Blue Sky, bsky.lab/profile/denabra.mov, which is my domain. And like if there are any new links, it's gonna be like I do have actual site denabra.mov that's like it just has links to stuff.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
if there's something new, it will appear there. It's kind
Mhm.
of bare bones, but
Yeah.
it's a thing.
And you also have a YouTube channel.
And I also have a YouTube channel. Yeah, so
Yes.
that's if you search for Dan Abramov, you'll probably maybe find it. I don't know.
Yeah. I liked your first video, Hello World. That was
Yeah,
so
yeah,
good.
okay. Yeah, I was like, okay, is is this thing on?
And then you have like, I don't know, 20,000 subscribers after that. You're like, Hello
No,
World.
I had some before. Like I
Oh,
had some
you
from
did. Oh,
before
yeah.
because I was posting a few lives like a couple of years ago. It was
Mm,
just me like doing random stuff, like some coding, but I never really like posted like intentional videos, and so I kind of reset the channel. And yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna keep doing it. Like I think like editing is a bit just like seeing yourself talk is a bit weird. I don't
mm.
want to spend too much effort like making it like talks.
Yeah.
But then if it's kind of more, off the cuff, then like it feels a bit too low effort. Then I'm worried like,
Mm,
oh, is this like low quality?
right.
So, well, we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoyed you sitting. I don't know if it's a backyard or like a garden
Like
chairs.
terrace, yeah,
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 terrace. Yeah, I really like those conversations in general and on YouTube because of how authentic they are, right? Because you are
hmm
just bringing your setting and your life to us, which is really cool. So no pressure, but if you keep creating content there, I'll definitely be checking out and watching for sure. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.